We want to spend some time considering the transits as well. We've already touched upon them briefly in regards to the dashas and how to work them out in regards to overlapping with the dashas, the trigger transits. But there are some important aspects of transits that we have to know, and some of them are very basic. For example, if we know the innate quality of a planet, meaning we go back and we review previous talks on Sun, Moon, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter, Rahu, and their innate quality. How do they act? What is their energy? Then whenever we have one of those planets transiting a certain house, remember a house represents an area of life. Fifth house can deal with children, meditation techniques, speculative investments, romance. Sixth house can deal with enemies, debts, delays. Seventh house, relationships, faraway travel. Eighth house, longevity, psychic influences, our deeper psychological states, and so on. Once we know what all of these things represent, then when we get a planet going through that particular area, and we can see how that area of life will get colored by that planet. And one of the great books that I like to use, and I've used it extensively for years and years, and here's my copy, it's pretty much falling apart, I can take pages out of it and put them back in, is Beneath the Vedic Sky by William Levesey. This was probably one of the first astrology books that I ever got, and it's a very good book. And in the back there are combinations for planetary transits. For example, I'll just open to page 296 here, and on 296 it talks about Jupiter being in the 10th from the Lagna, or the ascendant. What kind of influence can that give? Well, the favorable influence is that people take an interest in you. It's time to educate yourself to expand your positions. It's a good time for networking with successful people. Your work becomes more highly regarded. You have better opportunities within your work and your career. It can also be a time for teaching and consulting, or benefiting from teaching and consulting. Why is all this? Because Jupiter is the planet of expansion. Jupiter is the planet of consultation. Jupiter is the planet of teaching. Jupiter gives more opportunities. So when it goes through the 10th house, it's going to bring those things to the affairs of the 10th house, career-related, activity-related things. So we need to know what the planets mean, what they represent. The planets are key to everything. Once we know that, then we see where is that planet going by transit, what house is it in. We could just as easily consider Jupiter going through the second house. Well, second house deals with capacity to provide for one's resources, take care of one's family. And so when Jupiter goes through that position, if it's in good dignity, if it's got good Ashtakavarga points, then it's going to bring expansion to that area. It can be a very profitable time period. And that brings us to the point of Ashtakavarga. Now, we don't really have time to go over this in detail in this survey course, so this is something you want to study on your own. But most astrology software programs already calculate Ashtakavarga for you. And essentially what it is, there's Sarvashtakavarga and Ashtakavarga, and it'll give you a point system indicating if a planet's going to work better or worse. And the higher the points within each sign, the better a transit will be. Which means that if we have a malefic going through a sign and the points are higher, there's less likelihood that malefic is going to cause the problems that we might think. If the Ashtakavarga points are lower, then that means that malefic's probably going to cause more problems. And this is one of the keys that you can use for things like Saturn return, Sati Sati period, nodal returns, transits of the nodes. Just look to see, well, what house, what sign is it going in by transit, and then look at your computer program to determine, well, what's the points for the Ashtakavarga. If they're high, and we'll say, just to be safe, 25 or higher. If it's lower than that, so 25 or higher would be good. If it's lower than, say, we'll just say 20 here, the worse it's going to be. And there's the middle ground as well. So Ashtakavarga helps us to color in and see how is a transit going to affect us for the positive or the negative. And that can also apply to benefic planets. If a benefic planet's going through a area with low Ashtakavarga, well then, that means that you might not get as much of the good thing that you expect. If it goes through a sign with high Ashtakavarga, well, that makes that benefic work even better. So Ashtakavarga is a very interesting, helpful tool that I think some astrologers overlook. I use it quite often, especially for transits and predictive purposes, and I find it works very well. So keep that in mind. Now, some other things to consider in regards to transits. Well, there's the idea that, say, for example, when Mercury goes retrograde, where everything goes wrong. Or, when certain planets go retrograde, things are bad. Well, this is really dependent on a few things within your birth chart. First of all, if Mercury is in a bad situation in your birth chart, then difficult transits of Mercury, such as when he's in an enemy sign, debilitation, with an enemy, retrograde, well, you're going to feel those more. If your Mercury's solid, it's not going to affect you so much. And it's the same with all the other planets. The other thing you need to consider as well is that it depends on the house that the planet rules. For example, for a, let's see, what would we pick here for this? For a Capricorn ascendant, well, Mercury is going to rule the 6th house. For a Pisces ascendant, not Pisces, let's go with Sagittarius. For a Sagittarius ascendant, Mercury is going to rule the 7th and the 10th. Now, the difference there is that for a Capricorn, Mercury ruling the 6th house, which is a difficult house, when it goes retrograde, Capricorn is going to feel a little bit more because Mercury already rules a difficult house, even though he also rules the 9th. But you get the point here. He's going to feel a little bit more. Whereas for Sagittarius ascendant, Mercury rules the 7th and the 10th. Now, Mercury is not necessarily the best planet for a Sagittarius ascendant, but still, he's not ruling terrible houses. A better example would be if we had an Aquarius ascendant. Because if we have an Aquarius ascendant, again, now what do we see? But Mercury is ruling the 8th house. So again, Mercury is going to be felt a little more profoundly when it goes retrograde. For Virgo ascendants, for Gemini ascendants, Mercury rules very good houses, so they're going to be less impacted by it. But again, this all really depends on the status, the situation of Mercury within the birth chart, and that's for all planets. For example, when Mars goes retrograde, for a Virgo ascendant, that can be a difficult transit. Why? Because Mars rules the 3rd and the 8th house, which are very difficult houses. So when you're getting all bent out of shape about retrograde planets, transits in that regard, figure out which planets rule the bad houses for you, and those are the ones you want to get bent out of shape about. Otherwise, it's my thought that you're probably just indulging in self-fulfilling prophecy. And I see that happen a lot with people. Okay, now one last thing about transits. The transits are very specific to your chart, and this is one of those reasons why I probably won't ever do a video where we'll say, for this month, Virgos can experience this, Sagittarius can experience this, Aries can experience this, because everyone's chart is so unique that if you do something like that, you're going to hit on something for a number of people because, there's shared experiences. But it's probably not because of certain ascendants. And that's because, for one reason, the placements and the situations of the planets within the chart are very different. Number two, within the Vargas, that's the other aspect here. So if we have Venus transiting a person's 7th house, well, that can speak to relationships and intimacy within relationships, or more of that romantic love flair that Venus brings. But we also need to look at the ruler of the 7th Bhava cusp within the Saptamsha for intimate relationships, creative relationships, sexual relationships. We need to look to the ruler of the 9th Bhava cusp within the Navamsha. And when we get these things coming together, well, this is when you're going to get a specific event occurring for an individual. So having the sun go through a person's 10th house, yes, the sun can deal with status, the sun can deal with prestige. But we would also need a combination of the ruler of the 10th bhava cusp getting involved in this transit, as well as the dashas we've already talked about, before a really powerful event will be occurring within that person's life. Otherwise, they're just going to be these general trends. And it's okay to speak to general trends, but we have to remember that the 10th bhava cusp in the Dasamsha is going to be different for everyone, for the most part. What planet rules that? The ruler of the 10th house is going to be different. So you can have a Cancer ascendant who has the 10th lord going into the 10th house, but maybe the ruler of the 10th bhava cusp in the Dasamsha is not there. Now let's say you've got a Cancer ascendant, another person, who has that same thing, the ruler of the 10th going into the 10th, but now they have the ruler of the 10th bhava cusp in the Dasamsha aspecting or conjuncting either the first house, first bhava cusp, or 10th house. Well, now that's a more important time period for a career for this individual. So what we have to see with transits is there are the general indications of the transits, but then there are the specific indications of the transits. And those specific indications are really dependent on what's going on inside the person's chart, how that planet is situated within the chart, and also what bhava cusps that planet rules throughout different vargas. So we have to put all these things together. And this is, again, where it gets very complicated, which is a lot of fun if you have a lot of time. It's very enjoyable to find these things. But it does take a couple hours, even longer sometimes, of intense contemplation to figure out when are these things going to happen. Sometimes it doesn't happen until a person's 80, and they're 30 now, and they want to know when are they going to meet the love of their life. It's a hard thing to say to someone that, well, it doesn't quite look like it until you get to this position. Or you might be talking to someone and they want to know when are they going to be famous. And you look at their chart and you say, well, you sort of peaked. At 9 years old, that's when you had the transit, and you weren't really in a situation to take advantage of it. And that's not always the case. A lot of times you do see things coming together in confluence, and that's a lot of fun. Because when you can see it and you can tell someone about it, you can make that prediction. Personally, I just find it very rewarding. Because it doesn't happen too often. But that speaks to life in general, how most people, again, live average lives. Occasionally there's these big spikes that occur, but for the most part, it's pretty steady. And there are a lot of people that contact astrologers, and they want like an urgent care session, or they're desperately looking for when is my life going to change. And it's a hard thing to say, but to be honest, you need to ask the person, well, has your life always been this way? And if so, more than likely it's not just going to change. Now, sometimes you get clients who their life is going pretty well, and maybe they just hit a dry patch or they hit a rough patch. Now that's a little bit easier to work with, because if they're used to that state of success and they hit a rough patch, that's easier to say, oh, well, okay, you've hit a rough patch, this is how you can deal with it. But we have to remember that the planets represent our habits, and people can be in the habit of having a difficult life, and they need to somehow get out of that habit. And the best way I found, again, you're going to hear me say this again and again, is through meditation and yoga practice. You can see some rough charts, but if you see someone who's really working with it, you'll be surprised at what can occur. But it takes some hard work, and there's really no easy solutions to it. It just takes a lot of dedication. And usually when you tell people that, they say, well, I can't meditate. And what I say is, well, when I started, I could only meditate for 7 minutes. And I had to force myself to do it every single day. Now, I can meditate for quite a while, and it's just fine. So again, it's not about what can't you do, it's about what are you willing to do, right? And the transits can help us see the more fortuitous times of fortune. And we can get very specific if we line up the dashas with the transit, even go into the vargas and see those matching up. You can see periods that are difficult, and you also see periods that, again, are just like any other day, just average things. The planets are always moving, so you sort of expect that something's going to happen. But why doesn't something big happen all the time? Because you don't get the lineup of the dasha with the transit, with the indications within the vargas all at the same time. That's why it doesn't happen. That's why something amazing doesn't happen all the time. So anyway, consider this, think about it. There's a lot in this particular talk here, and it will take a lot of contemplation. But if you really think about it, get a sense of it. In time, you'll have a lot of fun with dashas and transits. You'll really be able to see some interesting things in a person's life. And you might want to expand upon this. Remember, this is just a survey course. I mean, we're just going over the basics. We're trying to get the information out there so that you can start to see what it's all about. You might need to take some advanced study, and Ernst Wilhelm has classes that speak to this. Currently, we're going to be doing a dasha-related class here in about a month, June of 2014. So there are ways to explore it. So look at your education within Vedic astrology, within astrology, not as something that you do a couple workshops on or a couple seminars on, but something that is of a collegiate level or master's level or even PhD level. You can go pretty deep with it, and sometimes it takes that amount of commitment. And you're starting to see what's involved in this. So anyway, that's enough on the transits for today. I've only got a few more talks left, but it's been enjoyable, and we'll continue onward.